Since the birth of the Magna Carta, or the Great Charter, over 800 years ago, human beings have found security in the principles that underpin the rule of law, including the protection of all basic human rights and freedom from your own corrupt or inept government. It is arguable now in our post-9/11 world, the erosion of civil liberties and personal freedoms threatens to undermine the fundamental principles of the Magna Carta. This includes the separation of powers, the freedom of the media, protections for whistleblowers and other members of society who dare to expose corruption. The erosion of such vital protections and rights in Australia's liberal democracy begs many questions which should now be asked of our past and current political leaders. In essence, the distinction between modern-day cronyism and corruption can at times be difficult to make out. For instance, when did Australia's dubious foreign policy position on Timor-Leste and being a good global citizen become so separate from ethical decision-making and upholding good global governance? When did the power of large oil multinational corporations completely taint executive government control and lobby for the continued lack of transparency around political donations? And when did the false dichotomy between matters of national security and personal freedoms first become a tool of populist governments around the world, including our own? And now, how do these infringements shape the Australian identity nationally and globally in 2020, and what will the wider implications be of this new Australia? Bernard Collaery is a man all too familiar with this distortion of the Australian identity. With an extensive and highly successful legal and political career, serving as the Attorney General for the Australian Capital Territory between 1989 and 1991, Mr. Collaery also advised the East Timor resistance for more than 30 years on matters of international law. His association with East Timor, however, has more recently brought him to public attention as a result of his representation of Witness K. As we are gathered today in an institution which holds key values of truth, compassion, and wisdom at its core, I am honoured to introduce Bernard Collaery as your first speaker today, a man who has and continues to enact these in his professional and personal life. Please join me in welcoming Bernard Collaery.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was a very nice introduction. First, I want to start, dear friends, in acknowledging country. It's probably been done, but I want to. We stand on the land of the Ngunnawal, and when I walk along the rivers, the Murrumbidgee, the Monglo, when I walk in the Madgee, the Brindabellas, I'm very conscious of the spirit of those who've lived here thousands of years, and that we have spent a minuscule part of that time occupying that country. And I also want to say how delighted I am to be at Radford. We've had Radfordees pass through our practice. I hope we still get them, and they've always been an inspiration. The values taught here and the standards set are really uplifting, and I've always been impressed. Now, I've headed my talk today as a time for reform. Elizabeth told you some of why our country is desperately in need of reform. But to come to that, I want to pass a little bit through my 75 plus years. I grew up in the shadow of World War II. I recall my mother telling me when I was a young man that the man I'd been named after was an ex-prisoner of war, and he hadn't been strong enough to lift me. My generation studied we did social studies. We were going to dam every river. Children were still dying of diphtheria and polio in my day. And science improved our lives immeasurably. We had a railway station next to our farm. In fact, we practically had, when I was a boy on a dairy farm, our own railway station. It was called Balgownie, now Ferry Meadow. And those wooden platforms with chutes, after a few years in a migrant camp was built, a refugee camp was built, and this in huts on our once dairy farm. but we still stayed on for a number of years. I noticed the crowds of migrant refugee workers going up the same cattle ramps, getting on the trains, going into Port Kembla, and I witnessed the earliest form of multiculturalism. I think that was a term invented in the 70s and became quite current. But of course, I grew up in the true multiculturalism where, regardless of creed, when the boats arrived at Sydney with another load of children who were malnourished, this is in the early 50s, particularly after the starvations in occupied Holland, lots of thin Dutch kids arrived at our schools. I was in a convent school opposite the public school, and I think the school shared the new arrivals. So we were building a new and exemplary society. And what has come of that? Well, I'm back here. I'd rather have been and stayed in Cambridge, but I've come back here to support Witness K, and I'm faced with a trial myself. But I'm not despairing about our country, but I've reached a stage where if I'm to be put to my trial in my own court, I'll accept that soapbox and I will argue, as I do here today, for fundamental reform in our society. It has to come, as we've witnessed over generations, I think, from the young people. We can guide them, but the young people have to see that they must set a bearing on the values they want and the principles they want our political leaders to have. I'm lucky enough to have a first edition, leather-bound, of what's famous. Those who go on to law or our lawyers would know. It's a book called Quick and Garran, the Australian Constitution. Only so many were printed in 1901, and it's a great book. You'd be surprised how much our founding, mostly fathers, I regret to say, referred to the American experience. And there are famous sayings, and I speak of Jefferson and Adams. One of Adams' sayings was, "The law in all its vicissitudes of government will preserve a steady, undeviating course. It will not bend to the uncertain wishes, imagination, and wanton tempers of men. There is a danger from all men. The only maxim of free government ought to be to trust no man living with power to endanger public liberty." That's cited by our founding fathers in Quick and Garran as one of the bases to our constitution. And so how have we got to where we are now? We have a front federal bench in Parliament where bland and obvious lies are told. Truth, which should be a core value, is now open for debate. I was listening to Life Matters the other afternoon, and Julia Gillard was being interviewed by Hillary, by one of the presenters. I think it was Hillary Harper, and she was asked about going into the parliamentary, quote, bear pit. She said, well, it's a clash of ideas and values. That seemed like a pretty uncontroversial statement by Ms. Gillard, but when you think of it, and when you know it, and when you see it night after night on television, not so much lately after COVID, some of the issues clashing there is truth. Well, truth isn't a matter for clashing about. There's yes or no, there's truth or untruth. Truth has become a sort of debate in our parliament. And fundamentally, when do we have emphasis on truth in society? What do you think of the Children Overboard affair, for instance? Did anyone really believe that mothers would throw a child into the sea to get a visa? I recall going to mass graves in Timor And I wish John Howard had been there. John was at my law school, believe it or not, a few years ahead of me, but I recall him. I wish he'd been at some of those graves, because the mothers, those who'd been clearly holding an infant, had turned their backs. And we allowed that huge immoral lie to permeate our society. It was somehow other brushed over at the Barbies. It wasn't seen for what it was, a monstrosity. And that leads me to tell you that I was present not far from John Howard when he signed an express memorandum of understanding with the Timorese leadership to act in good faith in revenue negotiations. For a lawyer, that was an explicit written undertaking. It was connected to a treaty that was being signed, and it was a fundamental issue of good faith and foreign relations. Now, I can't tell you, I've been bound by an order that comes from the anti-terrorist legislation. I can't use the word about what happened in Dili that tells me that I'm so shocked that a man who signed that could oversee some other conduct I'm no longer allowed to talk about. And how and when did this kind of lack of value system permeate our society? Well, it's clear from the reactions to witness Kay's predicament and that of others at the moment that it's not a political dimension. I hear and see support from disc jockeys who have pronounced conservative views. From right to left in this country, there is disenchantment and a belief that our moral values have slipped in this country. And for students of history, there is a great lesson in what happened here in 1939. Joe Lyons was our Prime Minister, and that famous writer, author H.G. Wells visited Australia. H.G. Wells came, gave speeches around Australia fulminating about Hitler and Mussolini. Our Prime Minister stood up and rebuked H.G. Wells for his insults to those leaders. Wells went back to England and wrote that famous sentence: "The government in Australia represents all that is most indecisive, disingenuous and dangerous." Now, have we reached that stage again? Got to remember that until the January bushfires, our Prime Minister was presenting lumps of coal in the Parliament and deriding the notion of climate change. But even after he came back from Hawaii and went to Cobargo, the birthplace of my maternal ancestors, and saw and became aware of that even in the fast bailiwicks of conservatism, the farmers and right throughout the commissioners of the fire brigades, there was a belief in climate change. Our Prime Minister's response to Greta Thunberg was to suggest that she was needlessly causing anxiety in our youth. Now, we do need a change maker. We need a change maker to return us to the basic concept of parliamentary leadership. There must be informed, that is, informed by science, informed by all available methods. There must be informed leadership. There has to be principled leadership, and it has to reflect the values that all the electors embrace. Some suggest that economic rationalism has reversed our historic nation-building legacy. What was the robo-debt algorithm about? How did that happen? Was it just sheer negligence, or was there somewhere in the pyramidal structure of advisings in government just a lack of awareness as to the impact of such an algorithmic policy? So does neoliberal orthodoxy continue to present a disaster for us? Well, they are those who believe, those views about economic rationalism believe that is responsible for sucking the moral perspective out of decision making. That's a legitimate viewpoint, but I'm not sure whether the real answer is simply that we're not getting exemplary leadership, and we need it. Now, my trial will be bound up with foreign policy. It'll be bound up with notions of Australia's economic well-being, Australia's national security, and Australia's foreign relations. Because it's only for those three rubrics can government requirements be set for spying. Now, in relation to Timor-Leste, it's not an enemy. It presents no dangers to us in accepted national security orthodoxy. And every defence white paper in recent years has said that we need stable democratic governments in our region. And above all, given Timor's situation on our trade lanes, it's an unsinkable aircraft carrier. All those years I spent in Timor working with the leadership, I worked hard to develop our intelligence and defence relationships in a sensible manner. You can imagine what treachery I felt, what heartfelt shame I felt when Witness K, with approval, came to my office. Now, the other matter was you can spy for foreign relations. Well, squeezing the Timorese further was hardly effective foreign relations. So where could this have been a government requirement? Economic well-being. The problem is that the mistake many Australians have is that Australia benefited substantially from the Timor Sea. We didn't. There were two valuable things in the Timor Sea, liquid natural gas and helium. They were equally valuable. But more importantly, we had massive sources of gas in our country, but we had no helium. Helium has been a defence-listed critical commodity since the 1930s. After the nuclear age arrived, even in the small manner of MRI imaging, helium became a vital commodity. But our Defence Department had it listed as a critical commodity. And at current and then prices, helium was as valuable as the gas. Every drop of that helium was given away to predominantly foreign-owned companies for no return to Australia or Timor-Leste. Half the value of the gas field was given away, and as current treaties and documents stand, half the value of the future Sunrise High, that is, the helium content, goes away. Only in a few places of the world is there helium. Helium gets trapped under granite domes. There's a vast dome in Wyoming in America, and there are a few others in Poland. There's one on the Siberian-Chinese border. There was a vital commodity that Australia needed. It was not revealed to the Timorese. I didn't know about it in my years there. It was kept secret. During the Indonesian era, it was pumped back underground. But Australia connived to give away, mind you, to give away in a decision crucially made in a parliamentary office at night in our federal parliament. Crucial decision was made to give the gas containing helium, that is, the inert gases, the other gas, other than liquid natural gas, away as waste. Timorese were never told about it. The Australian team negotiating apparently didn't know about it, but someone else did. Laws of defamation stopped me saying who. The helium was given away to ConocoPhillips, a foreign United States company, and to Woodside. Now, Minister Downer has said on Four Corners that, yes, I did help Australian companies, and I specifically helped Woodside. Woodside's never been, in relevant times, less than 83% foreign owned. It's disingenuous and classic of the doublespeak of our parliament to say it's an Australian company. Coca-Cola's an Australian company. Johnson & Johnson's an Australian company. ConocoPhillips is an Australian company. Woodside is an Australian company because they're registered here. So we gave away $8 to $12 billion worth of helium we could have used for free childcare in a country or whatever. We gave that away. We didn't get it. Australians didn't get it. Timorese didn't get it. It was a corporate deal. And that is what the government does not want discussed in open court. Now, how do we deal with this? And how do we not despair? The answer has to be, surely, that we have to shame our leadership into telling the truth. There are 3 or 4 trials waiting in this country. They'll probably mature around the time of the next election. God knows who wants to face a jury during an election period and how difficult that will be for everyone involved. It's almost like the forthcoming Trump election and might well develop into the same populist disaster for our democracy. As these matters approach trial in front of juries, you're going to have 12 citizens deciding not just my fate, not just witness K's fate. He hasn't pleaded guilty yet. He's considering pleading guilty. And the other people who are facing trial. How has Australia done this? And why are the Chinese in Beijing laughing themselves sick? How wedged have we done ourselves in? There'll be a secret trial for Collaery. And there are secret trials in Beijing. Ordinance 3 in Hong Kong has almost exactly the same words as Section 31(8) in the NSI Act, under which my proceedings were said by the current Attorney General to be likely to prejudice national security. It's the same wording. Beijing has used in the Hong Kong ordinance that's so objectionable a direction to its police and judiciary that they must give the greatest weight to national security as perceived by the Central Committee in Beijing. Almost the same words are in our Act of Parliament, the one we brought in for terrorists. Now, these matters will mature. It'll be a disaster for foreign relations in our region. The Pacific states are looking on, and it's really to our shame, regardless of what happens to me, regardless, and worse still if I go to jail. Sections of the population will make me out to be a martyr. That's really not what any of us want as Australians. When we descend to these depths and mirror the habits of totalitarian leadership, we lower all of our values. We diminish ourselves. It's just not a matter that can focus on, as is the current debate, what's happening with Collaery, push him onto a soapbox. Who wants that? I was happy riding my bike around Cambridge. Moreover, I had the wholly fraudulent title of Senior Academic Visitor. And I wrote a book in peace. Well, is it in my karma as a civil liberties lawyer to be this, whatever I'm going to be, Dreyfus, scapegoat, or whatever? But it does our country great harm. great harm. And it troubled me greatly to hear one of our judges. You know, I'm used to watching juries. When you're going wrong, they let you know because they sit immobile, but they go, oh. And when you're going well, they can't resist going, oh. I got a dig in the elbow from someone in court during the closed court, and there was someone I can only describe as a zealot in the box, and I saw the judge sort of nodding, and I felt, oh my God. And of course, that judge has decided and gone along with the view of the Attorney General. And he didn't seem to need much prodding, which is ominous. I can say no more because he'll be my trial judge. So here I am, free at the moment, going to enter the box in the court in which I spent my career because I've represented witness K and gave him legal advice concerning what I regarded as unlawful action. Now, I've been asked what the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security should do about this issue. The first thing is, it was the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security who sent witness K to see me, approved him to see me, and wrote a letter to him saying he could take private legal action in any court or tribunal. Well, I chose a tribunal that the Foreign Minister was obliged by treaty law to appear. There was no other method of compelling the appearance of this Foreign Minister than in the manner in which I chose. And that was to be in camera in The Hague. And the other thing I want to let you know is that all of the public statements about this outrage occurred after the raid and seizure of my brief on my chambers. So, asked by the crossbenchers, that is Andrew Wilkie, Rex Patrick and the others, to investigate this issue, the current Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, the Honourable Margaret Stone, said that it's not within her remit to examine the issues of propriety. And, quote, my power to consider propriety does not extend to whether it should ask ACIS to collect foreign intelligence on a particular subject. So she should decline to investigate it. That's the watchdog. That's the watchdog. Recently transferred out of Prime Minister and Cabinet to the Attorney General's Department. So where can we go to stop this? Well, I'm not going to telegraph our punches, but every day, we're now, I think, into our 39th appearance. Every day this matter is in the media, we are causing harm to our country. So who's behind it? If anyone knows, tell me, because I don't. Why are we doing this to ourselves? I found out who my local member is recently. Very nice young woman. She was out in the cold outside the court with the demonstrators, Alicia Payne. She has a baby due in about 6 weeks. She was out there for at least half an hour or an hour in a biting cold wind demonstrating. I thought that was great. Where are those politicians? Where is their voice? I went to see her on the following Monday to thank her. I was really impressed. I mean, I'm not into the party political issues, but I thought, well, there's our future, a younger parliamentarian. But can she cut through? But the view, of course, from her side is that prosecuting Collaery is an own goal. Is an own goal by their political opponents. You know what that tells me as a seasoned operator? They'd like to keep it cooking all the way to the election. I won't get off this. So you see the paradox of politics? The own goal needs to be up there straight when I'm facing my trial. And the poor jury, what are they going to be asked to do? And I guess what they're going to do is to be told that a foreign power was advantaged by secrets, that is, that we secretly did something that I can't mention. If you were one of my children or grandchildren, you couldn't laugh, particularly if you got my name at school. We won't go into that, but it was pretty ordinary of this young lawyer, this federal attorney, to do this to me, because I was bowing out through Cambridge. I was writing a book. The warning letter I got, because word came out that I had finished the manuscript, I got a letter from the Federal Attorney General's Department reminding me there were 10-year penalties for disclosing secrets. I wrote back and said, well, there are no lawful secrets being exposed. So that left Mr. Turnbull and Mr. Dutton and the attorney with a decision whether they'd ban my book. Well, from a spycatcher perspective, that is, Malcolm represented right in the spycatcher case, he could hardly politically ban my book. 3 weeks later, one evening, while I'm cooking a meal, 2 police arrived with summonses for me for conspiracy. That made my manuscript sub judice. So the manuscript was pulled, Monash pulled out. Bless Melbourne University Press, bless their Chancellor. We took what you might think was the sensational parts out, 30,000 words, and it was published by Melbourne Uni Press in the best traditions of Up You, right? And there it is, it's out there somewhere, oil under troubled water, but minus what they managed to censor indirectly in that sly, double-speak, slimy fashion that governments become in this country. Is that it? Right.